Hey there, welcome back. Today, we're diving into something super exciting, Spring Boot WebClient. Ever wondered how to call APIs like a pro? With WebClient, you can easily handle everything from GET requests to POST, all while managing headers, body and more, effortlessly. Up until now, we've explored how to make REST API calls using REST template. But today, we're switching gears and stepping into the world of WebClient. Why the switch, you ask? Well, WebClient is the newer, more advanced sibling of REST template. It's reactive, non-blocking, and super efficient, perfect for modern high-performance applications. Whether you're dealing with streaming data, multiple API calls, or just want to explore the future of REST communication, WebClient is your answer. Let's roll up our sleeves and get started. First things first, let's open our pom.xml file. To use WebClient, we need to add the Spring Boot Starter WebFlux dependency to our project. This addition ensures that all the necessary libraries are in place for us to work with WebClient effectively. Let's create a class called WebClientConfig. In this class, we'll define the basic configuration for our WebClient. It's going to be a simple setup for now, but trust me, we'll explore more advanced stuff like timeouts, polling, and connection management in a future video. Stay tuned for that. Let's create the WebClient bean. Alright, creating the WebClient object is easy. All we need to do is call WebClient.builder, and then simply call .build to create our WebClient instance. That's it. It's that simple. Don't worry about configurations for now, we'll save those for later videos. For now, just focus on getting your WebClient object up and running. Now, let's move ahead and create a new class called REST WebClient. In this class, we'll write the code to make our WebClient requests. Let's inject the WebClient bean that we created earlier. Alright. In the previous videos, we created a method using REST template to handle things like query parameters, path variables, headers, and the request body. Now we're going to do the same thing but with WebClient. Now, let's copy that method we created earlier and paste it into our REST WebClient class. As you can see on the screen, we're simply moving the logic we had with REST template into WebClient. Okay, let's keep it super simple. We're still doing the same thing with the URL. We use URI components builder to build our URL, just like before, and we're adding the path and query parameters. Nothing new there. Now for the final part, where we were creating the HTTP entity object and making the call with REST template. In the WebClient version, we're going to remove the REST template part entirely. First, call the WebClient method where we'll define the type of HTTP request we're making, get, post, and pass the HTTP method here. Next, we use URI, method of WebClient. This is where we pass the URL. We can easily add headers using the headers method. Simply pass a lambda expression, and this is where we can add all the necessary headers to our request. Next, let's assign this to a variable. The return type is WebClient.requestBodySpec, and we do this because in scenarios like with a get method, the body might be null, and we want to handle that gracefully. Now, if we're dealing with a GET request, or any request with no body, the body might be null. We'll set the body only if it's not null. If it's a POST, PUT, or any other request with a body, we'll pass it here. Set the body using bodyValue, method of WebClient. Once everything is set up, we call the retrieve method to send the request. This method is responsible for actually triggering the HTTP request to the server, starting the process of receiving the response. It's like hitting the send button after setting up all the details of the request. Next, we want a response body wrapped in a response entity. We'll call toEntity and pass the expected response class. Since WebClient is for reactive programming, it returns a mono or Flux, asynchronous. But since we want a blocking call, non-reactive, we use .block to get the response synchronously. If the body is null, we'll do the same steps as in the if block, but without calling body value, since there's no body to set. Everything else works just the same. Now that we've written the WebClient code, let's move on and open the employee service class to see how we can integrate everything. First, let's inject REST WebClient into the employee service class so we can start handling our requests. Now, let's call this method from addEmployee. All we need to do is swap REST client with REST WebClient, since the method signatures are exactly the same. Let's modify the logger in WebClient so we can easily track whenever a WebClient call is made. Now everything is set up. First, start the employee service. Now, let's run REST client service. As you can see in the logs, when the addEmployee method was called, our WebClient method was triggered. Since we printed it in the WebClient, we can see the output right there. Just below, you can see the response from addEmployee has been printed. This means our WebClient is working as expected. Right below that, you'll see the fetchEmployee call. We didn't make any changes here. This one is still being called via REST template. Alright, let's quickly go over what we've learned today. In today's session, we explored how to make API calls using WebClient, which is a modern, non-blocking and reactive way to interact with APIs, similar to how we used REST template. We went through the steps of setting up the HTTP method, defining the URL, adding headers, and handling the request body. We also saw how to process the response and how WebClient supports reactive programming. However, we used it in a non-reactive way by calling the block method, so we get the result directly. Next, we'll be discussing how to configure WebClient in more detail in a future video, which will allow us to fine-tune the way our WebClient behaves for specific use cases. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next video. We look forward to having you with us in the next one.